Welcome to this short video in which I will provide a detailed description for the Z-spring, its indication, advantages, disadvantages, and activation. Let's start with the indications. The main indication for using the Z-spring is for proclining a single anterior tooth, incisor tooth, which is the tooth may be retroclined, so we need to procline this tooth by moving it in a labial direction using the Z-spring, or it may be in a cross-bite relation. In this case also the Z-spring can be used. Another indication is it may be used for or can be used for correction of simple rotations in case of less than 45-degree rotation of the tooth, as in this case. The Z-spring along with active labial arch can be used to produce a couple force for correction of rotation. Couple force means if there is a labial arch here, the Z-spring will start from the distal side because this is the side which needs correction. So there will be a labially directed force from the Z-spring and a palatal directed force from the labial arch. These two forces are equal in magnitude and opposite in direction and separated by a distance. This is called the couple force. Couple force used for correction of rotations. However, correction of rotation is better achieved using fixed appliances rather than removable since they provide better control of desired tooth movement. So we're still discussing the correction of rotation. Here the labial arch is used in conjunction with the Z-spring, also to provide guide for the final position after correction of the incisor position, and to provide the couple force for correction of rotation. This figure represents the couple force, two equal forces acting in opposite direction, one in a labial and the other in a palatal direction. These two forces are separated by a distance, so this system of force is called couple force. In case of using the Z-spring for correction of rotation, it's important that to position the head of the Z-spring in a correct place. So in case of mesiolingually rotated maxillary left central incisor, the head of the Z-spring should start from the mesial aspect because this is the side which needs correction, and the same is here. Since there is mesiolingual rotation or distobuccal rotation of the tooth, so the head should be placed at the mesial aspect. So if the tooth in a retroclined or in a crossbite relation without rotation, it will not matter whether you place the head of the spring in the mesial or in the distal aspect. Description of the Z-spring. Z-spring or double cantilever spring is self-explanatory in that the shape of the spring resembles the letter Z. It has 3 arms and 2 coils. The active arm has a small loop at its end. The loop is directed gingivally. Toward the palatal tissues. So if we explain the Z-spring on this left central or lateral incisor, it will start from the mesial aspect of the tooth. The head of the active arm is directed gingivally. Then it will move toward the distal side where the first coil will be bent above the active arm. Then the wire will be directed again toward the mesial aspect where the second coil will be bent below the first coil. Then the wire will leave the second coil toward the distal side again, and at a point at the middle of the tooth, the wire will be directed and bent in a palatal direction, leaving 5 to 6 millimeters of the wire straight for construction of for the retentive arm, then the zigzag bend will be placed. It's important that the mesodistal diameter of the spring is confined to the mesodistal width of the tooth. The coils should be tight and the spring need to be squeezed to produce a greater range of action. The arrangement of coils in which one is above the active arm and the second is below the first coil or below the active arm, this will provide better adaptation of the spring on the palatal surface and reduce the vertical height of the spring and thus reducing the thickness of the acrylic base plate. It's important after completion of fabrication that the spring will be adjusted perpendicular to the long axis of the tooth. This will allow the proper application of the desired force. If the tooth was not adjusted to be perpendicular and remained flat against the palatal surface of the tooth, in this case it will slide incisally when it's activated and it will produce intrusive force in addition to the proclination. So as you can see here, the spring should lie perpendicular to the long axis of the tooth. The spring is adjusted in the cervical third of the tooth, should lie about 1 to 1.5 millimeter away from the palatal mucosa. The spring need to be boxed to prevent distortion. So after completion, before construction of the base plate, the active arm and the coils, all these should be covered with wax. A layer of wax is placed, keeping the retentive arm and the tag free from wax. This wax will be covered by the acrylic base plate. So the spring will finally lie in a recess, as you can see in this figure, between the acrylic base plate and the gingiva. This will protect the spring from damage and distortion. Advantages of the Z spring. The presence of two coils allow the application of force in a straight line. So by activation of the spring, by pulling the active arm away, this will open the spring about 2 to 3 millimeter and the active arm will remain parallel to the tooth surface, thus it will produce force in a straight line. Otherwise, if there's only one coil, the force will be directed across the arc of the dental arch. It will not be directed anteriorly or in a straight line. Also, the spring, as mentioned before, can be boxed, so it will lie in a recess between the acrylic base plate and the palatal mucosa, thus the distortion possibility is reduced. The disadvantages, it's not suitable for posterior teeth because it can be trapped. If after activation, it can be trapped on the occlusal surface during insertion of the appliance. Also, the limbs of the spring need to be long enough. So in case of a small lateral incisor or there is limited space in the arch in the area of lateral incisor, the spring may be too short spring limbs. This will make the spring too stiff. If the limbs are too short, then the spring will become stiff and the adjustment will be difficult and limited. So it's advisable in case of small lateral incisor with limited space to construct the Z-spring using a smaller diameter stainless steel wire. How to activate the Z-spring? The easiest way is to grasp the active arm between the beaks of the plier and pull the spring away from the base plate in an upward forward direction. This will elongate the spring by 2 to 3 millimeters and the active arm will remain parallel to the tooth surface. This will allow the application of the desired movement and equal amount of force will be applied on both sides of the tooth. In case of correction of rotation, activation is achieved by opening only one coil, either the first coil or the second coil. thus producing more force on one side of the tooth, which is the side need to be corrected. It's important to notice that in case of anterior crossbite, the base plate should include posterior bite plane, which is capping or extension of the acrylic base plate into the occlusal surface of posterior teeth to free the bite and the occlusion, and this will allow correction without any interference.